afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the North San Antonio Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, our chamber partners and sponsors, welcome to today's program. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this special presentation and the first of many discussions about the future of Texas and San Antonio. In the year 2036, Texas will celebrate its bicentennial. It was in San Antonio that a pivotal moment in history commenced Texas's path to independence. So it seems fitting that we start here in our city and ask ourselves, is San Antonio ready for what's next? Texas 2036 is a nonprofit organization founded in 2016 by public policy leader Tom Luce to look at state economic and infrastructure challenges and advocate for data-driven strategies to improve those issues as our state approaches its 200th birthday. With the onset of COVID-19, we're experiencing many hardships, and this pandemic has shed light on our deepest challenges, particularly in education, workforce, and infrastructure, just to name a few. To be the best place to live and work for the next generation of Texans, the San Antonio region will need to come together to think strategically and plan for the right path forward as we recover economically from this pandemic. We are honored to help kick off the efforts of Texas 2036 here in San Antonio, and we are proud to be represented on the Texas 2036 board by Cheryl Scully, former San Antonio City Manager and owner, 26.2 Consulting, Elaine Mendoza, President and CEO, Conceptual Mindworks, and the Chairwoman of the Texas A&M Board of Regents, and Graham Weston, founder and former CEO of Rackspace Hosting and CEO of Western Ventures. I'd also like to thank and congratulate AJ Rodriguez, who will be officially starting as Executive Vice President of Texas 2036 later this month. Today's event was made possible with the support of our generous sponsors. Our title sponsor today is IBC Bank. Our event sponsors are Alterman, Alvarez and Marsal, ATKG, Deacon Recruiting, Documation, Jackson Walker, JP Morgan Chase, MGR Accounting Recruiters, Robert Half and Associates, RSM US, the Spirit of Texas Bank, Texas Capital Bank, and VACO. Thank you so much for supporting this program. Before we begin, I want to recognize and thank our San Antonio area chamber partners, the San Antonio Chamber, the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber, the South San Antonio Chamber, and the West San Antonio Chamber. Richard, Al, Christian, Marina, thank you so much for always being willing to collaborate with us. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Eddie Aldrete, who is a Senior Vice President at IBC Bank, and will moderate today's program. Eddie?
Thank you, Christina. IBC Bank is proud to be the title sponsor for today's program, and we're proud to support all the work that you and your team do at the North San Antonio Chamber. IBC Bank is also a proud investor of Texas 2036, and let me tell you why. In 1836, our leaders in Texas had a vision, independence, to better the lives of its people. The Texas Declaration of Independence clearly stated that should the Texas government fail to do its job, the first law of nature, the right of self-preservation, would be for Texans to take their political affairs into their own hands, for it is their obligation to secure their own future welfare and happiness. Today, the leaders of Texas 2036 stand on the shoulders of our founders to fight for those same principles so that we, as Texans, may advocate for the betterment of our families, our neighborhoods, and our communities. While the principles have remained consistent over the last 184 years, the battle lines go by different names: public education, higher education, workforce development, mobility and transportation, broadband access, mental and physical health care, and quality of life, to name a few. That's a tall order for a nonprofit, but once you meet the leaders of this organization, you will quickly see their drive and determination to get the job done. So let's meet them now. Tom Luce is a man who has spent his entire life thinking about the future while helping others discover the best path in which to take to get there. He measures his success not by what he has done for himself, but how much more he can do for others. He was the founding and managing partner of the Hughes & Luce law firm. He has extensive public policy experience at the state and federal level, having been appointed to a variety of boards and commissions both here in Texas and in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Tom has founded or led a variety of nonprofits, including Just for Kids, the National Math and Science Initiative, the National Center for Educational Accountability, and the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute. President George W. Bush appointed him Assistant Secretary of Education, where he served under Secretary Margaret Spellings. And most recently, he founded Texas 2036. Margaret Spellings is the President and CEO of Texas 2036. She has served as an advisor to Governor George W. Bush, later to be appointed U.S. Secretary of Education by President George W. Bush. As Secretary, she launched the bipartisan No Child Left Behind Act. She also launched the Commission on the Future of Higher Education, focused on access, affordability, and accountability. Prior to serving as Secretary, she served the President as a domestic policy advisor. Tom Luce, Margaret Spellings, welcome to the program.
I want to recognize and thank IBC and all the sponsoring partners today. Dennis Nixon, I understand, is in the house. Dennis, great to see you. Andy, all the crew there. And I want to acknowledge and thank our tremendous board members from San Antonio, Graham Weston, Elaine Mendoza, and Cheryl Scully, who are all terrific and are adding such great value. And recognize also a special shout out to a new member of our team at Texas 2036, your native son, AJ Rodriguez, who will assume a role as Executive Vice President leading our Austin shop here in just a few weeks. So it is terrific to be with all of you. And if they'll call up the slideshow, I will commence to answer your questions, Eddie.
Thank you.
Well, first, a little bit about Texas 2036. It was founded by Tom Luce, who is an appropriately socially distant 6 feet away from me now, and who is here with me, and you'll be hearing from. But Tom is one to put himself on the civic battlefield over and over, and he did so, and he can tell you a little bit more about the founding when we get to him. But the truth is, he went around and said, hey, is anybody thinking long-term about these most important issues in our state? And hoped to partner with those that were, and got some blank looks, and so decided to found Texas 2036. We are focused on state policy as a key lever of change. We're a big state, the 9th largest economy in the world. That's pretty powerful. We take a whole of government approach, looking across silos. We know that educated people are healthy people. Educated, healthy people are build businesses and are civically engaged, and on and on. So we are looking across the whole of public policy. We recently launched a strategic framework for Texas, which I'll talk a little bit more about, that we call Shaping Our Future, that sets out goals for Texas into our bicentennial in 2036. And Eddie, thank you for the history lesson that you gave us. And of course, based on that framework that sets the horizon for us, as Tom likes to say, if you're going on a trip, you need to know if you're going to Brownsville or Oklahoma City. And soon we will roll out a legislative agenda and begin to work on these most important things, many of which are being surfaced by COVID. Next, please. So one of the first things we needed to do was make some friends and build a board. And you can see, and I mentioned the 3 San Antonians who serve on our board, but this is a who's who of Texas in my mind. They represent really every industry. It's a bipartisan group, men and women, all ethnicities, all parts of our state. And together they are helping lead our work and inform our work. And so we're really proud of them. And especially those 3 San Antonians that are serving with us. When we look at the data, and if there was one important differentiator to take away about Texas 2036, it is our fealty, our reliance on many hundreds of publicly available data sets that inform our work. And so, as Tom likes to say, without data, you're just a person with an opinion. And so we want to be a person with facts. And so the data tells us, when we look at these many hundreds of data sets, that we have work to do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those. Well, first of all, we're a big state, as we know. We're 29 million people today. We're going to add another 10 million or so by our bicentennial in 2036. In that time and today, we are getting simultaneously older and younger. We are getting more diverse by the day. That's an asset in my mind. And we are getting increasingly urban, which is not to say or give short shrift to the 3 million Texans that live in the rural parts of our state, fully more than 18 other states' entire population. So we're big, we're mighty, we're diverse. We have a great hand to play, but our future will be predicted by how we do it. Now, I want to pause here for a second and highlight the little triangle you see in the corner that says to text Future Biz to 52866. And we're giving you a little pop quiz as we go that you'll have a few minutes to answer while I'm speaking, that you can tell us what you think those most important issues are based on the data. So you'll see as I flip through the next several slides, that number to text your priorities for our state. So I'm going to make this little public service announcement one time, but please participate. If we are going to stay the mighty engine of prosperity that we are and have been, the #1 job creator in the nation, we need to grow many more jobs. In fact, more jobs than we have in the Dallas Metroplex and Houston combined today, more than 8 million jobs. Next. We know, and you see this, that the prosperity in our state is really not shared. Our urban areas are growing and continue to grow rapidly. I don't need to tell you in San Antonio about that big growing job market, but certainly that prosperity is not shared throughout our state, and much less so in rural areas. This is really being exposed by a lack of broadband access, which we'll also talk about next. Please. So those jobs that we need to create, those 8 million jobs, most of them are going to require some post-secondary education, fully 16 years of education, at least 2 years of education beyond high school, 14 years of education. And today, in spite of the fact that most of the jobs require that level of education, only 32%, about a third of our students, reach that level of credential within 6 years of graduating from high school. So clearly a mismatch between the needs of the market and what our systems are producing. We know that our student achievement is far from stellar, needs lots of work. And I take no joy in the fact that we have gone from 33rd in the nation in the mid-2000s down to 46th today. I'm a big what gets measured gets done kind of person. And when you take your foot off the gas on reading and math, we've seen that. We're thrilled, obviously, that the legislature intervened with House Bill 3 and has made some major investments and some improvements, but we have work to do in our K-12 system. Next, please. Healthcare, another thing that's being revealed starkly in this COVID era. We spend a great deal of money on healthcare in our state, both as taxpayers and as individuals. And you see on the left-hand side of the slide, the major increases really outpacing almost everything that we buy. And yet our outcomes are very poor. When you think of the number of uninsured children and adults, we are dead last in the country. Our maternal mortality rates are less than stellar. Diabetes, obesity, childhood immunizations, and on. Thank you, MD Anderson and others, for the great work you do on cancer, where we're actually a leader. Next, please. Broadband, again, something that's being surfaced absolutely by the COVID era as we send our children back to virtual schools, as we attempt to use telemedicine for our doctor's appointments, and as we work remotely through e-commerce. And so this is both an urban issue and a rural issue. Many parts of our state lack that broadband access, that high-speed 5G kind of access that is required to learn or to receive health care. But in our urban areas, it's largely an affordability issue. In fact, 4 of our major cities are some of the worst connected in the nation, largely around subscriptions and the prices of subscriptions. So just a fun fact to know and tell, we have nearly 6 million students in our public schools. In the spring, there are about 1.8 million students who either because of a lack of broadband access or a lack of devices, affordability, all of those issues really lacked access to e-learning. And there's been some good work done this summer to correct that, but most of that has been temporary. So what are we going to do about it? Well, enter Texas 2036. And what we have set ourselves out to do is set some goals. Where do we want to get across these most important parts of our policy landscape? We've compared ourselves against a set of peers. I'll talk about that in a second. And then we've set some targets as to how far we think we should get and can get over the next 16 years. So we've been clear-eyed about evaluating where we are, where we need to be, and charting a course to get there. Next, please. Our 36 goals are both simple on their face and complex under the hood. And I'm just going to give you a little sampler, a little taste of this, because to learn more, I commend you to our website, which has 57 primary indicators and 110 secondary indicators across these 36 goals. For policy wonks, policy nerds like me, this is the kind of thing we live for. But on their face, we wanted to articulate these goals in simple ways. So you can see in early learning, that first goal under education, something that you in San Antonio have really paid great attention to, gotten some terrific results. We say Texas children get a strong early start to succeed in school and life. I think we can all agree to that. So this is our first set of goals around education and workforce, health, which speaks to availability and affordability, population health and public health, infrastructure, mobility of goods and people, safety, digital connectivity, and the like. Next, please. This is the second 18 of the goals. You'll see the natural resources section up there. Simple goal, Texans have clean air. Is that something we aspire to? Why then do we have cities in federal non-attainment? And do we need to work on that? Justice and safety, another issue that is top of mind when we look at protection of the vulnerable and our safety net systems, our justice systems, things we need to pay attention to. And last, in that bottom orange bar, government performance. This is another unique aspect of Texas 2036. We're paying a lot of attention to how well we run this $250 billion enterprise we call Texas. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right data systems? Do we have the right modern methods of management? Are we customer service oriented? And do we have what we euphemistically call aligned accountability? And that is strong partnerships between the state and its own actors in cities and counties and school districts and hospital districts. Are we all moving in the right direction and moving in the same direction? We call that aligned accountability. So those are our 36 strategic goals. As I said, we are established a bit of a space race sort of formulation, setting ourselves against a set of peers, 12 states total, together representing 62% of the GDP of our country. They are geographically diverse. They are red states and blue states, income taxers and not. These are the people that we compete with for business, for talent, and have size and scale. And you'll recognize those states because as San Antonio competes head to head with Raleigh or Miami, you'll recognize those states. Next, please. So when we look at how well we do against our peers, we surface some things, and frankly, and this is just among us, I know, our Texas brand is fantastic. We're all Texas braggadocios and wouldn't want to be or live anywhere else. But when you look under the hood, we have work to do. We're number 6 for quality of life. We rank last in early literacy among our 12 states. We're last or near last on a variety of health measures, last or near last on broadband, and et cetera. And so I commend our website to you that really tells the truth about where we are now, but also is very optimistic and bullish about where we can and must get in order to continue to be the best place to live and work. Next, please. So when you look at Bexar County, a place that you all love and care a lot about, Likewise, we're surfacing these issues. This is not news to you. Education, high school graduation rates have improved, but not enough people with a bachelor's degree in your county. Workforce issues, median household income at 55,000. I'm sorry, there's a typo there. Infrastructure, obviously an issue, less so than it was 9 months ago. Health, natural resources, and justice issues. Again, I'll share this deck with your team so that you can distribute it. We are just eat up with data, and we have a data lab and tools that anyone can get on and customize to their own issue interests or their own region or county. We have a couple of really interesting, unique prototypes that I would point you to. One, an education and workforce reporting tool that is unique in the country, where we have linked K-12 data with community college data, public university data, and workforce and wage data. So you can look in Bexar County and you can see who are producing our healthcare workers. Do they get employed? What happens with their wages? How are they performing relatively against their peers in other counties or cities, and so on. Likewise, we have prepared an incredible COVID-19 dashboard, actually at the request of the governor's strike force, that we stood up quickly, that includes, yes, health data, best as we have, but also data on business closures, unemployment claims by sector. So it too is a terrific tool, and we'll continue to populate that with school information and other information as we have it. We're also engaging, we're always in learning mode at Texas 2036. And as we debate issues like expanding healthcare access and coverage for more Texans, we have to be as smart as we can be. And that's why we're in the midst of a health coverage study that tells us, based on the COVID experience and the amount of job loss we've had, what are the tools before us that policy makers might consider to really enhance coverage. They include Medicaid expansion, of course, the use of waivers, how we maximize the ACA, how do we get people enrolled in programs that they're eligible for now. So we will bring this tool to bear in mid-November or so, and we're very excited about what it can do to help elevate the debate around health. When we think about what we take from our goals and then start to think about, well, what are we going to do first? We look at a few principles. And one is we know that all Texans have to enjoy prosperity, or that's our aspiration, sort of that no child left behind, same sort of framing. You know, the state or country that wins the race will be the state that develops their people most impactfully and to the highest levels and full potential. We want to be high impact and data informed. We want to be clear-eyed and pragmatic and bipartisan. We want to build toward 2036, our bicentennial. We know Rome wasn't built in a day. And again, we want to partner with other governmental bodies, including our cities and counties. Next, please. So as we head into the legislative session and our team considers these, along with our legislative committee of our board, really four things clearly are surfacing. One, education and workforce. As I mentioned, the legislature did some really good work around K-12 and House Bill 3, but we really need to attend to that alignment between the needs of our workforce, the needs of the people that have many been displaced by COVID, but also what the market demands are of employers. We need to work on digital connectivity. There will be no e-learning. There will be no telemedicine. There will be no e-commerce if we're leaving millions of Texans behind. Health and healthcare, clearly, we've all seen that your neighbor's health matters a lot to you, and that'll be more and more true over time. And then last, as I said, government performance. How well do we run this big giant enterprise we call Texas? Next, please. So how can we work together? Well, as I said when I started, you know, we are natural allies. The things that chambers of commerce all around the state are concerned about are the things that we at Texas 2036 are paying attention to. We look forward to our work together. Tell us what's most important to you. You can do that right now by texting Future Biz to 52886. I hope you've done that. You can check out our data tools on our website, use those resources. You're welcome to cite these. They are all open source. You can help promote our research, our legislative agenda. We want and welcome our work together. And of course, we can't run our enterprise without financial support. So that's always welcome too. So I will stop there and turn it back to you, Eddie.
And I just want to remind our viewers to take this poll by texting Future Biz to 52886, and we'll come back to that that poll and the results. We'll share the results of that poll a little bit later. Margaret, first of all, congratulations, and Tom, you have a treasure trove of data, and this is a very robust agenda. So Tom, let me go to you. At the beginning, we talked about the Texas Declaration of Independence laying the foundation for why it may be necessary for Texans to take political affairs into their own hands. I know at IBC Bank we follow the Plato philosophy of get involved in the political process or be governed by those who do. And it seems like with Texas 2036, you have provided Texans both the incentive and the data that they need to engage.
Well, we sure hope so. And as you said, Eddie, the way I phrase it, there's good news and bad news about our form of government. And basically, it is we get what we deserve. And if we're not participating, and if we don't have a FOR agenda, F-O-R, then we're not going to get what we want. And too much of our politics today is we don't want this or we don't want that, but that doesn't drive the future. And if you look at the essential functions of government, which are really to enable our businesses to grow and our people to prosper, there are large systems that impact those people. People live in systems. A healthcare system, an education system, a mobility system. And so you have to impact state policy. Local efforts alone are not sufficient. They're absolutely necessary. I mean, what you've done in San Antonio, for instance, on early literacy is very important. But if state policy ever drives against that or doesn't support that, then you can't be as impactful at the local level as you want to be. So what we're trying to do is represent the entire state, learn from the bottom up, but make sure the top down makes sense to local efforts. And that's difficult in a large state like Texas. That's the reason why Margaret and I, pre-COVID, we're traveling all over the state. Now we're doing it by Zoom calls. But it's important to understand, you know, Texas is probably at least 7 different economies, maybe more. And so it's very difficult to make sure that you have a government that's not in the way, but instead is supporting what we need to do at the local level. And so we want to concentrate on the state policy, but we want the public to be sufficiently informed that they can demand action, specific action of public office holders. I said in a conversation the other day, I have numerous candidates who come to me like everybody else has for support or money or whatever. I've never met a candidate that was against education. But you need to get under the hood and say, what is their plan to improve education? And so we want to provide the specifics so people can be informed citizens. So as Margaret likes to say, and I think she's absolutely right, we want to build the demand side from the public for specific policies that will help everybody have an opportunity to prosper. And I've always believed the essence of our country, our state, is to provide everybody the opportunity to honestly maximize their potential. And I think that's really what Texas 2036 is about, is really creating that informed demand from our citizens.
A few years ago, 10 to 12 years ago, Dr. Steve Murdoch, our former state demographer, used to warn members of the legislature that that light at the end of the tunnel was a demographic train that was headed our way. And so my question is, from a demographic standpoint, we're seeing Anglos age off the life chart, and we're seeing Hispanics heavy at the beginning of the life chart from 0 to 10. Hispanics are the future workforce of this state. The challenge that we have is they have a higher high school dropout rate and a lower college attainment rate. And Dr. Murdoch's warning was we may be facing a point where we are raising the first generation of Texans that may be less educated and less wealthy than their parents. Margaret, Tom, are we still on that trajectory? And if so, how do we turn that around?
Clearly, that is the fundamental. I hate to always identify just one issue because we're trying to cut across all the silos. But if you really pin me down, the future of our state and the strength of our state is the maturity and the potential of our Latino population. And our job is to make sure that they're given all the educational tools to make sure that they're prepared to prosper in the coming changes in the workforce. When I graduated from high school, that was shortly after the dark ages. If you had a strong back and a good work ethic, you didn't really need to even graduate from high school to make a living wage sufficient to support a family. That's not true today. And so we have to prepare our Latino community from an early age to be able to prosper and learn and to at least complete 14 years of education. But that has to be directed by data. For instance, if you look at our education to workforce tool, we have too many students that are settling for getting a degree in, quote, general studies, not as a healthcare technician or not as an IT worker or not preparing for the construction industry with the right certificates. We need to make sure, and that's the reason why we did this unique education to workforce tool, was to enable students to learn in an early age. You know what, if I follow this pathway, then I'm gonna have a living wage to support a family. And that's the way Texas needs to have its workforce, is everybody have the opportunity to, honest to goodness, have a living wage to support a family. That's what we all want. But the key to that is educating our Latino students. And that starts at an early age. And it must be consistent. It must be demanding. It must have high expectations. And we've taken our foot off the gas on education, as Margaret said, in math, reading. And I used to have a coach that would tell me, you'll never exceed your own expectations. And we need to have high expectations for our students, because if we don't, then they won't exceed to their potential.
It's just not acceptable for only a third of our people in Texas to reach that level of a credential within 6 years of leaving high school. And so, we need to be mad as hell and not going to take it anymore when it comes to our educational attainment, because if we don't, everything else will go wrong. And so that's the game. And that's why I'm so proud of what you all are doing in San Antonio around early learning and really starting early and setting high expectations for our youngsters, which will pay huge dividends. It's also the super smart investing in education.
And the young person who enters the workforce today, they may end up working in 6 different industries by the time they retire. That's a different world in which I started my career. The world's changing. And so we put a lot of responsibility on our public schools, and I understand that. But that's what we have to meet, because the world is going to change, and we have to deal with competition. the truth of the matter is Texas is in a competitive race for talent, and business is going to go where talent is. And that's the name of the game for the next 16 years.
So, Margaret, when Texas 2036 started a few years ago, obviously that was in a pre-pandemic world, and the organization had high goals in the area of education. Currently, in this pandemic, what we've discovered is that not all students have access to broadband to be able to do their homework or to be able to just participate in a virtual learning session with their teacher at their school. So how have you had to amend the education goals when we have the basic fundamentals that we have to tackle first?
Well, obviously that has really surfaced those broadband issues to top of mind, and we need to bang on the door of our state and federal policymakers to solve for that. But there are some silver linings in this COVID era, and we're going to see incredible innovation and renaissance in technology and offerings of high quality instruction through those platforms. We're going to be able to embed assessment and progress monitoring where teachers can get real-time feedback. Parents can get real-time feedback about how their students are doing. And when we think about assessment and accountability, something that's really been laid bare here in the COVID era, there'll be some improvements there as we use technology to monitor how well students are doing along the way. You're right, it's foundational. Our teachers need to be better prepared to use these tools and to do so effectively. But again, back to silver linings, I think our parents are coming to understand in very real ways how well little Precious reads or ciphers or whatever. And so now we have a whole bunch of informed parents who are active, who expect a lot from their schools and are going to be much better consumers of what their children are receiving. And so I'm excited about that. But we really are on the cusp of some real powerful innovation if we get those broadband platforms in place in ubiquitous ways.
But Andy, let me add there, we cannot say to ourselves we have to lower our goals or lower our expectations because of COVID. Mm-hmm. Because our children suffered a learning loss by the fact that we had to go unprepared last spring to virtual learning. That's not a criticism of anybody. Nobody was prepared for that. Now we enter the fall where we may have schools open, close, hybrid models, but we have to just say this is the reality we have to deal with, and how do we overcome that? Because the whole education system is based upon sequential learning. And if you just ignore the fact that a child fell behind for a year, how in the world do we catch that up? I mean, we gotta get real about the post-COVID world. The post-COVID world didn't create these problems, but it altered the landscape. And so we've got to get real. And so when the legislature meets, we've got to talk about how do we make this up? Do we need to lengthen the school year for a while? What do we do about sequencing? How are we going to attack this? Because if you don't, then that's going to impact that child for a long time. Margaret has been preaching for a long time, and we all know about the summer loss, the so-called summer loss of learning. Well, it's been it's already been six months of loss of learning. And we don't know what we're going to face in the fall. So we've got to be real. And the post-COVID world also revealed a lot about our healthcare system and the lack really of a population health system. We were not prepared with public health systems to be able to respond to a pandemic. And this is not going to be the last pandemic that we face. But even if it's not a pandemic, you look at the outputs of our healthcare system. Let me say this, pre-COVID, Texas was out of an educated workforce. What I mean by that, we had more unfilled jobs than we had unemployed people. And sadly, the unemployed people didn't have the skills to fill the unfilled jobs. And yet we have to grow to increase prosperity for everybody. So we're going to have a healthy, well-educated workforce that can get to their job. So all of that's intertwined.
So you talked about the empty slots. We didn't have enough people with the right skills to go into those job openings, and that brings up the area of workforce, which is a critical issue not only here in San Antonio but in the state. For years, Texas and Texas leaders like to brag about the Texas miracle, that we had a ready, willing, and able workforce, that we had low taxes, and that we had a high quality of life. But Margaret, you talked about several areas where we're lacking, and now that we're in the pandemic, and Tom, you served on the governor's strike force to open Texas, how do we focus on workforce and help not only those that need help right now in the interim, but then also the longer term training that we'll need for many of those people?
I'll take the first crack at that. And as I like to say, we've got to get organized for success. Right now, we have a very inefficient market when we look at the needs of our employer community. And I'm going to include the public sector in that as well. We don't have the right kind of technologists running our government. We don't have the right cybersecurity experts in our government. They're an employer too. We will never have enterprises better than the people in them. And so, for starters, we have to understand what is the market demanding of us. And then we have to look at that supply side, our community colleges, our universities, our K-12 schools, private providers, employers, and make sure that there's alignment there. And right now, we do not have that. I used to say in my university president days, we say we want people with at least 2 years of education beyond high school. But what we taxpayers pay a big premium for, and I'm going to make my university friends mad, is graduate and postgraduate education, often around the liberal arts. So, we need to put our money where our mouths are to make sure that our people have the skills, not only for their own lives and their own health and their own prosperity, but for ours too. And that's why this learning loss issue is so critical for all of us, because, it's not just those poor kids are going to be in trouble. Our state is going to be in trouble. Our country is going to be in trouble if we don't pull up, have high expectations, and correct those learning loss issues.
It's going to take more than the traditional model in the post-COVID world. And what do I mean by that? Employers have to get organized for success as well and be at the table doing a better job of articulating exactly what skills they need. Too often, we have defaulted to some certificates or pieces of paper which may or may not be relevant. We may have a human resource department that says we need a college graduate to do X job. Well, if you look under the hood, what you may need to fill that job is somebody with the following skills: 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the business community, we want to engage to say, work with us. Let us be the interpreter to the academic community, the community colleges, to say, how about giving us a 4-month certificate that shows us a person has achieved X skill, and we'll hire that person. They can continue their education, but we know they've got that skill. Or let me give you another example. Right now, and this is going to happen in our economy, we have a lot of unemployed people coming from the oil and gas industry that need to be reskilled and upskilled But we cannot just say, let's put them aside, because we need everybody to have the opportunity to be reskilled and upskilled in our changing economic landscape. So this is going to require a new effort that really, and one of the things that Margaret has initiated is a workforce of the future initiative that would enable us to say, we've tracked what we're producing today. What do we need to produce 10 years from now? Because the pipeline in the education system takes a while to produce that skilled worker.
So
I would just add,
go ahead, Margaret.
Brand of university, institutional brand is becoming less and less important to the employer community. They want somebody that can code. They want somebody that, can demonstrate this particular skill, and, whether it says, a fancy private brand at the top or even a flagship brand at the top, is mattering less and less all the time.
Do you feel like there's a little bit of a conflict when private employers are seeking people right now in certain sectors, and the higher education community is pushing more people for 4-year degrees? You have this simultaneous push and pull of the current need versus the future need. I think you mentioned in your PowerPoint, by 2036, 71% of Texas jobs will require some post-secondary education.
But that doesn't necessarily mean a baccalaureate degree. That means education, technical skill that can be demonstrated to an employer and lead to a job. And yes, of course, we need PhDs in French literature and all manner of expertise. But if you want a job, you've got to have skill around particular industries that we're growing here in Texas.
Ready and willing. The question will be, will they be able? And that goes to giving them the opportunity to acquire the skills they need to hold the jobs that will exist. And we understand, and the reason we set Texas 2036 as a long-term organization, the only way you can remain a competitive state and a state that's business friendly is to solve these problems in a financially responsible way over time. You cannot change the education system overnight. You cannot change the highway system overnight, create a mobility system overnight. And our belief is you must do that incrementally in a fiscally responsible way. And really the fundamental issue of state government is always, how do you allocate scarce resources? Fortunately, in Texas, we have to balance the budget and we can't print money. Today in Washington, they just print it digitally, but we can't do that. So we have to balance the budget. So the fundamental question is, if we have a fixed amount of resources, how do we allocate that to get the best return on investment? How do we allocate between education, health, mobility, natural resources, justice and safety? So that's really the fundamental issue we want to confront, is how do we allocate those resources to produce the best future for the most Texans?
So one of the questions, we have questions coming into the chat box now, and you all hired AJ to oversee public policy, and one of the questions that we're getting in is, how has COVID impacted your legislative agenda, and the difficulty that San Antonians and Texans may have in being able to enter the Capitol building to go visit with their members of the legislature. So talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted your legislative goals and just accessing your members of the legislature.
Important, and that is why people like AJ Rodriguez, who have relationships with your officials in San Antonio and all over the state, people like Tom and me who, are old hands at this. And so we'll be advantaged in that way because we can pick up the phone and call representative, fill in the blank. It's going to be a learning exercise. I will say also that I think people who have data, who have facts, who have a case that can be made, who have a microphone that can be amplified. We have tens of thousands of followers. I mean, the sorts of infrastructure that we've built, including hiring terrific people like AJ, are going to be really important to achieving good outcomes. Secondly, I would say just in terms of policy, we've talked about it. Broadband has to be front and center, and we'll have a coalition that includes the business community, the health community, the higher ed community, the K-12 community, because it's essential to the fully functioning of all of those enterprises. And it'll be hard to mount an effort against a mighty coalition like that. Workforce, as you've mentioned, we have millions of Texans that are unemployed who need to go back to work, who need to get reskilled. We need to keep our foot on the gas on the improvements of House Bill 3 and the investments that have been made on how well our government works. We've seen, our systems crash on unemployment claims and our health data systems, security issues, hacking that has gone on. We have got to do a better job of running this great big enterprise we call Texas. And then lastly, it will be a budget session. How do we make choices around all of these needy investments, including health and public health? The reason that, expanding Medicaid, which previously heresy, is because of the confluence of factors that are before us. Large numbers of unemployed because of job loss. An understanding that someone else's health matters a whole lot to you. And maybe it's important that others have coverage, not just your own self. Issues around maximizing federal investment. Right now, we're leaving a lot of federal money on the table. Is that prudent in this economic environment? These are questions we're posing that need data and that need a civic debate in Austin that's very informed around the needs of our state.
And Eddie, I would add to that, it also gives, I think, an unusual, unique opportunity to people in your audience in terms of the changes in how legislation is going to be made. Because your audience members each have probably a relationship with one or more public officials. And in the session coming up, picking up the telephone and calling them will be more important probably than walking the halls in Austin, which was the feature of the previous session. I'd also say that because of COVID, this is the most unpredictable session I've seen in 40 years. Because of COVID, there weren't as many interim hearings. The state government was distracted by COVID. There isn't a, quote, pre-cooked legislative agenda that people know is going to be on the table. So this is going to be a fast-moving train and a flexible train. And the ability of members in your audience, our ability to galvanize them to contact the people with whom they have relationships is going to be terribly important.
So, not to mention the political uncertainty.
No, that's a major issue. I'd like to share some of the poll results that have come in, Margaret, from the questions that you all had on earlier. So the question is, what's the #1 issue facing San Antonio? 46% said more Texans get the skills to find good jobs. 27% said pre-K and COVID learning loss. What's the most important issue the Texas legislature gets right? 24% say workforce development, 24% say broadband for e-commerce, telehealth, and distance learning, and 16% K through 12 education gaps tied with healthcare access, affordability, and outcomes. And what is the number one issue facing Texas in the future? 44% say education and skills for students to meet future needs, and 24% changing climate and limited water supply. So good information there coming from our San Antonio community that provides us with even greater data. And I want to talk about the data that you have, because it is a truly, it's like a treasure trove. So can you share, Tom, you talked about the education to workforce tool that you had. Can you share other tools? Because there's a lot on your website, and I think it's critical for people to know where they need to go to access the specific information they seek.
And we urge them to we would urge them to go to the Texas 2036 website and look at the data lab. I think you'll find there a lot of tools that'll be of great interest. Let me give you one example. Our COVID-19 tool. I was with a conversation with leaders in Fort Worth just last week, and I said, if you look at our COVID tool, you'll see the third highest number of jobless claims have come from the airline industry. Well, that shocked them. But it immediately focused their attention that was a workforce that needed to be employed and reskilled or change industries that they had to pay immediate attention to. I mean, they guessed, and probably, I think, as I recall, number one on that list was people in the retail restaurant industry. Well, that you might have expected, but you didn't necessarily expect, but because of the impact of DFW Airport, they immediately saw, there's a pool of skilled workers that we need to make sure we get employed so that we help Texas grow. So that's one tool. The second thing I would say is that we also have the capacity, and we're doing this for a lot of nonprofits and foundations that come to us and said, would you help us build a dashboard to measure our own progress for our own goals? What you'll find is unique about our data lab is that most of our data all of it is down to a county level. So not only do we aggregate at the state level, but we'll say, okay, here's how Bexar County looks on ads. You can actually enter Bexar County and find all the information we have about Bexar County. And then you can compare Bexar County against another county, an adjoining county, or maybe against Dallas County or Austin. So there's lots of ways to employ this. And we're always available to help organizations. We want our data used. We're trying to create an environment where, at least in my viewpoint, is if we can get everybody, regardless of their viewpoint, at least looking at the same facts, we will have made enormous progress, because we have to get beyond the slogans of both parties and really say, how are we going to change mobility? And then importantly, as Margaret and I learned over time, even if you pass a piece of legislation, you better have the data to make sure, is it causing the result you want? Because you may need to change something about what you thought solved the problem. I mean, we've passed numerous water bills in the past, but we need to monitor what's happening on our water supply. What does the future water supply look for San Antonio? We need to be able to measure that, and that is the capacity that Texas 2036 will give an informed citizenry if, by the way, you write a check to support what we're doing, so we can keep doing that. I mean, I've got to be able to put that in, Eddie. I have knee pads and a tin cup, and I'm traveling across the state. So you need to help us sustain this, as of course IBC has done.
Eddie, if I could just add to that quickly as well. And, you know, we, Texas, and it's not an accident, people like George Bush and Rick Perry and Greg Abbott and our legislature over time has invested in a lot of public data, especially around education, where we're really a national leader. What the problem is if you ask TEA a question, they'll send you 75 PDFs and say, good luck with that. And what we have done at Texas 2036 is take the friction out of that. We've made it useful, usable, appealing to policymakers and to the public, so you can manipulate the data and tell a story and understand your region better. That's why the United Ways of Texas and United Way of Dallas is doing what Tom said, and that is we've built the engine. If you care about housing or hunger or whatever, take a look at our database and put it to work for you.
You've provided a great amount of information, overview, and some key data that we not only need to know for our state, but for our region. And now it's up to San Antonio to do something with it. So Tom Luce, Margaret Spellings, thank you both for joining us for today.
Thank you, Eddie. And thank you, Tom and Margaret, for sharing your insight. And Eddie, thanks again to you and IBC for sponsoring this event. To all our chamber members, you've heard the message today. We've got challenges to overcome that affect the way that we can do business. And now we've got the data, and it's up to us, to all of us, to get off the bench, to engage in the process at the state and local levels, or you're going to have to be satisfied and be governed by those who do. Thanks for joining in on the conversation today. Please wear your masks, wash your hands, keep your distance, and get out and support your local businesses safely. This concludes our program. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.